Father Vincent O'Brien arrived at the Shelbourne Hotel lounge 15 minutes before the appointed time, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched the rosary inside the pocket of the civilian jacket he had borrowed from Father Declan. It was the first time in nearly 2 years that he had worn anything other than clerical black, and the feeling of anonymity was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. He had chosen a chair in the corner, away from the main entrance, where he could observe without being seen. When Elena entered, he recognized her immediately from the photos she had sent, but the reality surpassed any digital image. She was more elegant than he had expected, moving through the lobby with the grace of someone utterly at home in luxury spaces. Her dark hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and she wore a simple black dress that spoke of expensive taste and recent widowhood. When her eyes met his across the elegant room, Vincent felt something he hadn't experienced since his seminary days: pure, uncontrollable longing. "Father Vincent," she said, approaching him with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You are even kinder looking than I imagined." He stood awkwardly, unsure whether to offer his hand or maintain proper distance. She solved the dilemma by grasping both his hands in hers, a gesture that seemed both intimate and appropriately grief-stricken. "Please, just Vincent when we're like this," he said, immediately regretting the implication. She laughed softly, a melancholy sound that tugged at his pastoral instincts. "Vincent, then. A good strong name. A saint's name." They talked for 3 hours that felt like 3 minutes. Elena was everything he had imagined and more: eloquent, surprisingly knowledgeable about Catholic theology despite her Orthodox background, and above all, genuinely interested in every word he said. They discussed faith and suffering, God's purpose in allowing loss, how they both felt isolated in their respective worlds. "You know," Elena said, leaning forward in her chair, "since I started talking to you, I feel like I finally found someone who understands my soul. My husband's business associates, they circle around me now like vultures, offering condolences while calculating what they can extract from me. Even Dimitri's family treats me like an intruder, claiming I married him for money." Her eyes filled with genuine tears that made Vincent's heart ache. "Sometimes I think God allowed me to become wealthy only to show me how meaningless wealth is without love, without purpose." Vincent instinctively reached out, briefly touching her hand in what he told himself was pastoral comfort. The electric contact made him quickly withdraw his fingers, but Elena gently held his hand in place. "Don't be ashamed," she whispered. "God created human touch as a form of healing. Christ touched the lepers, comforted the women who wept. There is holiness in genuine compassion." The theological rationalization reassured him, allowing him to maintain contact. Her hand was cool, delicate, with a sadness in her grip that spoke of profound loneliness. "What about you, Vincent? Have you ever felt alone, isolated despite being surrounded by your congregation?" The question struck him like a well-aimed arrow. "Every day," he admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Especially after my brother died. I feel like I've been hiding behind my collar, performing rituals while the world moves on without me." "See, God is speaking through you," said Elena, gently squeezing his hand. "Perhaps your true calling isn't to serve a small rural parish, but to go out into the world, to bring your gifts to places where they can truly transform lives." Her words echoed exactly the thoughts he had been secretly harboring, the restlessness that kept him awake during long Irish nights. When they said goodbye at the hotel entrance, Elena kissed him lightly on the cheek, a gesture that could have been interpreted as European courtesy if not for the way her lips lingered near his ear. "Can I see you again?" she asked. "I have a concrete proposal for the foundation that could change your life and the lives of countless people in need." Vincent returned to Cork in a trance. During evening mass, he could hardly concentrate on his homily. His mind filled with images of Elena's smile, the sadness in her voice, the warmth of her hands. Father Declan noticed his distraction, and after the last parishioner left, called him aside for a private conversation. "Vincent, you seem different," Declan said directly. "That trip to Dublin, it wasn't just about meeting a potential donor, was it?" Vincent's heart sank. "She's a genuine believer, Declan." A widow searching for meaning. The foundation she wants to establish could do real good in the world. Declan studied his face for a long moment. My boy, for 15 years I've watched you grow into a fine priest. You've always been steady, trustworthy, an example to younger clergy. But right now, he sighed deeply. Promise me that if something is disturbing your peace, if you're questioning your vocation, you'll talk to me before making any rash decisions. I promise, Vincent lied, knowing he could never explain the whirlwind of emotions Elena had awakened in him. That night, sitting in his small rectory apartment, he tried to pray for divine clarity. But his prayers were interrupted by his phone buzzing with a message from Elena. I can't stop thinking about our meeting today. You are an extraordinary man, Vincent. God has great plans for us, for the foundation, I mean. I believe that with all my heart. Attached to the message was a photo of her at an Orthodox church in Moscow, kneeling before an icon-covered altar, her hands clasped in prayer. She looked like a Renaissance painting of a mourning saint, a modern widow struggling to find meaning after devastating loss. He typed and deleted a reply dozens of times before finally sending. I can't stop thinking about it either. I need to understand what God's will is for this opportunity. You said you had a specific proposal. The reply came within seconds. Come to Dubai with me, Vincent. The foundation needs to be established there for legal and tax reasons, but more importantly, there are refugee communities there desperate for pastoral care. Syrian Christians, Iraqi Catholics, people who've lost everything. You could make a real difference in their lives. Imagine the impact you could have, away from the limitations of parish bureaucracy. Vincent read the message 3 times before its real implications sank in. Elena was suggesting that he travel to Dubai, spend extended time with her, involve himself in a project that would fundamentally change his life's direction. It was a questionable proposal, possibly inappropriate, something that should raise every red flag in his pastoral training. So why was his heart racing with excitement instead of caution? For 2 weeks after receiving Elena's proposal, Vincent lived in a state of spiritual turmoil that left him exhausted. He slept poorly, celebrated Mass mechanically, and his prayers turned into desperate negotiations with God. Every sign seemed contradictory. A homily he gave about Abraham leaving his homeland could mean courage to change or a warning against abandoning his calling. A scripture reading about service to widows and orphans could affirm Elena's mission or remind him of boundaries. Elena, sensing his hesitation, intensified her contacts. Her messages arrived every few hours, always at the perfect moment, as if she knew exactly when his doubts were strongest. Vincent, my friend, she wrote on a rainy Thursday, I spent the whole night praying about the foundation. I had such clarity. This work needs someone with your integrity, your theological training. God is calling us to something greater than our fears. Attached to the messages were increasingly compelling photos. Elena visiting a Syrian refugee family in Dubai, her face lit up with compassion as she held a small child. Elena at a meeting with Catholic Relief Services representatives, professional and committed. Elena standing in front of a modest community center that, according to her, desperately needed someone who could organize pastoral care programs. The center director was moved when I told him about you, Elena wrote skillfully. He said a Catholic priest with your education and heart would be a blessing from God for these displaced families. Vincent, don't you understand? This is no coincidence. It is divine providence. The words echoed in his mind during Mass, during confession, during the long evenings in his empty rectory, planting seeds of a dangerous conviction. The turning point came during a video call that Elena insisted on having. I need to see your face, she said. Text messages can't convey how much this mission means to me. It was a Tuesday evening, and Vincent was alone in the rectory, supposedly preparing next Sunday's homily. Elena's face on the screen was even more captivating than in person, vulnerable, earnest, with an emotional depth that drew him in like a tide. They talked for over an hour, and she painted such a vivid picture of the foundation's potential that Vincent could almost see it. The community programs, the refugee families finding hope, the children receiving education, the elderly receiving care. His role would be spiritual advisor and program consultant, perfectly legitimate, using his skills where they could truly matter. "My dear friend," Elena said, her voice becoming more intimate, "you should know that my marriage to Dmitri was complicated. We loved each other once, but in the last years," she paused, seeming to gather courage, "we were more business partners than spouses. He had his world, I had mine. I don't want you to think I'm some grieving widow clinging to the past. I'm trying to build something meaningful for the future." Vincent felt a confusing mixture of relief and excitement. If Elena was emotionally available, then maybe. "Don't misunderstand," she interrupted, as if reading his thoughts. "Our connection is professional, spiritual. We are partners in faith serving the same mission. That's what makes it pure." But her eyes told a different story, one that Vincent couldn't quite read but desperately wanted to understand. "Come to Dubai for 3 months," Elena pressed gently. "Just 3 months to establish the foundation properly. I'll handle all the logistics, the legal work. You provide the moral compass, the theological framework. Then you can return to your parish, and we'll have created something beautiful together." Vincent closed his eyes, feeling himself standing on a precipice. Every instinct of his training screamed warning. But another voice, one that sounded like longing disguised as divine inspiration, whispered that this was his chance for significance, for adventure, for something more than small-town parish life. "I'll need to discuss it with my bishop," he heard himself say. Elena's smile was radiant, victorious. "Of course. I understand the church has protocols. But think about it, Vincent. 3 months to do something that could change hundreds of lives. Isn't that what priesthood is really about?" After they disconnected, Vincent sat in the darkened rectory for a long time, his rosary clutched in his hands, trying to pray. But all he could see was Elena's face, hear her voice, feel the pull of the glittering possibility she offered. He told himself it was about ministry, about serving the marginalized, about using his gifts where they mattered most. He told himself the excitement he felt was spiritual rather than carnal, that his growing attachment to Elena was pastoral concern rather than something far more dangerous. He told himself many things that night in his small Irish rectory, as the rain fell outside and his comfortable, predictable life teetered on the edge of transformation. What he didn't tell himself, what he couldn't yet admit, was that he had already made his decision. The moment Elena had touched his hand in the Shelbourne Hotel, the moment she had looked at him with those knowing, sad eyes, he had been caught in a current he no longer had the strength to resist. Father Vincent O'Brien knelt before his small altar, rosary in hand, and tried one last time to pray for guidance. But the only answer that came was the memory of Elena's voice, promising purpose, promising significance, promising a future that glittered like the Dubai skyline, beautiful, intoxicating, and utterly, dangerously unreal. Tomorrow he would call Bishop Brennan. Tomorrow he would begin the process of requesting his sabbatical. Tomorrow he would take the first real step toward either the greatest mission of his priesthood or its complete destruction. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of his Irish rectory, Vincent allowed himself to simply feel the pull of something he hadn't experienced in 20 years of priesthood. The terrifying, exhilarating possibility that his life might still hold surprises, that God's plan might include paths he had never imagined, that perhaps, just perhaps, this mysterious widow from Dubai might be the answer to prayers he had been too afraid to pray. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Elena Volkov had orchestrated these exact feelings in at least 3 other men before him. That every word she had spoken was calculated, every tear precisely timed, every touch designed to create maximum psychological impact. That in Dubai, an empty apartment waited for him like a trap set with exquisite care. And that in 3 months' time, all that would remain of Father Vincent O'Brien's carefully constructed life would be a black leather prayer book, open to Psalm 23, sitting on an empty table in a vacant apartment, silent testament to how completely a human soul could be deconstructed by someone who understood exactly which strings to pull and precisely how hard to pull them. But that knowledge would come later. For now, Vincent simply knelt in his darkened church, rosary in hand, heart full of dangerous hope, taking the first step down a road that would lead him to the glittering towers of Dubai and the complete annihilation of everything he thought he knew about faith, trust, and the darkness that can hide behind the most beautiful promises. "But I admit that I have never felt such a deep connection with anyone," Elena said during their third video call, her voice trembling with what seemed like genuine emotion. "You awaken in me a devotion that I thought I had lost forever when Dimitri died." That same night, Vincent made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He wrote a carefully worded letter to Bishop Brennan explaining that he had received a unique opportunity to serve as spiritual advisor and consultant for an international charitable foundation focused on refugee ministry in the Middle East. He mentioned a wealthy benefactor who would facilitate his work with displaced Christian communities in Dubai, where his theological training and pastoral experience would be crucial in helping traumatized families. The letter was a masterpiece of semi-conscious manipulation. Vincent used all his theological education to biblically ground his decision, citing Paul's missionary journeys to distant lands, Francis Xavier's sacrifice of comfort and security to bring Christ to the Indies. He knew that Brennan, despite his fiscal concerns, could not argue against a legitimate opportunity to expand the church's charitable reach without appearing petty. But Vincent did not deliver the letter immediately. First, he needed to make practical arrangements that no parish priest had reason to make. Using his laptop, he discreetly researched visa requirements for the UAE, currency exchange rates, and international travel insurance. Elena had offered to pay all expenses, but he wanted to understand exactly what he was getting himself into. It was during one of these searches that he found the first disturbing piece of information. Searching for Elena Volkov Dubai widow businessman on Google, he found only vague and contradictory results. There was an Elena Volkov listed as director of a small real estate company in Cyprus, but the photo showed a woman at least 15 years older. There was another Elena Volkov mentioned in a Russian news article about investment fraud, but the article was in Cyrillic and Google Translate rendered it nearly incomprehensible. When he questioned Elena about these inconsistencies during their next call, she laughed carelessly. "Vincent, my dear, you don't understand how international business works. I use my maiden name for some ventures, married name for others. It's perfectly legal and very common in expatriate communities. Besides, there are dozens of Elena Volkovs in the world. It's an extremely common Russian name." The explanation made sense, but it planted a seed of doubt that Vincent desperately tried to ignore. Elena noticed his hesitation and immediately changed tactics. "If you're concerned about my identity," she said during their next conversation, her voice hurt, "we can meet again. I can show you documents, Dimitri's death certificate, foundation paperwork, anything you need to feel secure. I thought we had moved past suspicion, but I understand. Trust is earned." The fourth meeting took place at a quieter hotel in Galway, where Elena said she was meeting with potential Irish investors for the foundation. She arrived with a leather portfolio full of documents: Russian passport, UAE residency visa, Dimitri's death certificate, corporate registration papers for the foundation, even photos of her late husband that corroborated her story. Everything looked legitimate, professional, notarized. Vincent felt ashamed for having doubted her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I just needed to be certain. The church has protocols, responsibilities." "I understand your caution," Elena said, reaching across the table to gently touch his face. "A man as good and principled as you must be wary of the corrupt world. But trust me, Vincent. Trust in what God is building through us." She leaned forward and kissed his forehead, but this time her lips moved down to his cheek, dangerously close to his mouth. Vincent didn't pull away. For the first time in 20 years of celibate priesthood, he allowed himself to feel the warmth of a woman, the scent of her expensive perfume, the soft texture of her hair as it brushed against his face. It was inappropriate, he knew, perhaps even sinful, but it felt like awakening. "When do we leave?" he asked, surprising himself with his own decisiveness. Elena smiled, a smile he would later remember as predatory, but which he interpreted at that moment as triumphant joy. 3 weeks. I'll arrange everything. Trust me, Vincent. Trust in God's plan for us." Vincent left Cork for Dublin on a cool September morning, carrying only a medium-sized suitcase with civilian clothes he had purchased self-consciously at a department store and his personal prayer book, the same one his mother had given him at his ordination 20 years earlier. The letter to Bishop Brennan was on his desk at the rectory, along with detailed instructions for the temporary priest and a list of parishioners who might need special attention during his absence. Elena was waiting for him at Dublin Airport with a radiant smile and 2 business-class tickets to Dubai via Amsterdam. "My dear friend," she said, taking his hands in hers. "Today our real work begins." Vincent tried to match her enthusiasm, but he felt a strange knot in his stomach that he attributed to nerves about international travel. He hadn't left Ireland in over 5 years. During the 7-hour flight, Elena was the perfect companion, attentive, engaging, constantly reassuring him about the courageous decision they had made. She showed him photos on her tablet of what their collaboration would look like: the modern foundation offices in Dubai Marina, the community centers where they would organize programs, the smiling refugee families they would help. She had even created a preliminary organizational chart with his name listed as Director of Spiritual Care and Refugee Ministry. "You'll see," Elena said, holding his hand as the plane descended toward the Gulf. "God has prepared something very special for this work. The Foundation's board is eager to meet you. They said an Irish Catholic priest with your education and compassion will be invaluable to our mission." Vincent smiled, imagining what it would be like to use his gifts in meaningful ways again, to feel that his vocation mattered beyond baptisms and funerals in rural Cork. But when they arrived at Dubai International Airport, the first cracks in Elena's carefully constructed facade began to appear. She became visibly tense at immigration, checking her phone repeatedly as the officer examined her documents. She spoke rapidly in what sounded like Russian to someone on the phone, her tone sharp and irritated. Vincent didn't understand the conversation, but he noticed the officer seemed to be taking an unusually long time processing her passport. "Bureaucratic complications," Elena explained vaguely when they finally cleared immigration. "Sometimes they flag frequent travelers for random security checks. Nothing to worry about." But Vincent noticed that she kept glancing over her shoulder as they walked through the terminal, as if expecting to be followed. The taxi that took them through the city was a revelation, though not entirely the one Vincent expected. Dubai was certainly impressive: gleaming towers, pristine highways, architectural marvels that seemed to defy physics. But there was also something artificial about it, a sterile quality that made him uneasy. The streets were empty of pedestrians, the buildings seemed designed more for display than habitation, and the oppressive heat even in September made the air shimmer with mirages. "Is it different from what you expected?" Elena asked, noticing his expression. "It's remarkable," Vincent said diplomatically. "Very different from Ireland." "You'll adjust quickly," Elena said. "The expat community is very welcoming, especially to Westerners." But when they arrived at the address that was supposed to be the Foundation's temporary offices, they found a nondescript office building in a less glamorous part of town, far from the gleaming marina towers Elena had shown him in photos. "There was a problem with the marina space," Elena explained quickly. "A delay in the lease paperwork. We'll be working here temporarily, just for a few weeks until the main offices are ready." The small office suite on the 3rd floor was sparsely furnished with rental furniture. There were no foundation materials, no staff, no sign that any charitable work had ever been conducted here. The windows looked out onto a construction site and a view of older, lower-rise buildings. Vincent set down his suitcase, trying to process what he was seeing. Nothing quite matched what Elena had promised. "Where are the board members?" he asked. "When can I meet them to discuss the programs?" Elena hesitated visibly for the first time. "Well, there's a slight complication. Several board members are traveling this week. One is in London, another in Singapore. They'll be back by the end of the month. Until then, we can focus on developing the strategic framework, just the 2 of us." She moved closer to him in the cramped office, her hand touching his arm in a way that seemed more intimate than professional. "Elena, Vincent began, instinctively stepping back. "We should maintain appropriate boundaries. I'm still a priest, even if I'm on sabbatical. This needs to remain professional." Her expression flickered. Was that annoyance? Before settling back into warm concern. "Of course, Vincent. I apologize if I made you uncomfortable. I'm just so grateful you're here. Sometimes my appreciation comes across too strongly." That night, in the small serviced apartment Elena had arranged for him several blocks from the office, Vincent lay awake on the unfamiliar bed, finally allowing his repressed doubts to surface. He used the apartment's Wi-Fi to search for information about the foundation that was supposedly waiting for his leadership. He found absolutely nothing. No registration documents, no website, no mention in any charitable databases he could access. Even more alarming, when he accessed his email, he found an increasingly urgent series of messages from Father Declan. "Vincent, please respond. I'm concerned about this Dubai situation. I can't find any information about this foundation. Please call me and confirm you're all right." And one from Bishop Brennan, sent just hours earlier. "Father O'Brien, I need you to contact me immediately. There are questions about this sabbatical that require clarification. The diocese has been unable to verify the legitimacy of this foundation." Vincent began to type a reply, but was interrupted by a knock at his door. It was Elena, standing in the hallway, her face illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Vincent, I saw your light on. I couldn't sleep either." She was wearing a silk robe over what appeared to be nightclothes. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes." Every instinct screamed at him to say no, to maintain boundaries, to call Declan immediately. But he opened the door, and Elena slipped inside, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume and the promise of answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "Who were you emailing?" she asked, her voice suddenly cooler than before. "Just letting my colleagues know I arrived safely," Vincent lied, closing his laptop. Elena studied him for a long moment, and for the first time since they'd met, Vincent saw something in her eyes that terrified him, a calculating coldness that had nothing to do with grief or spiritual searching. "Vincent," she said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed uninvited, "we need to discuss something important. About trust, about commitment, about what happens when someone starts to doubt our mission." And in that moment, as the door closed behind them and the Dubai night pressed against the windows, Father Vincent O'Brien realized with chilling clarity that he had made a terrible, possibly irreversible mistake, and that the woman sitting on his bed was not the grieving widow seeking spiritual guidance, but something far more dangerous, something he couldn't yet comprehend but could finally, terribly see. Elena reached over and closed his laptop gently but firmly. "It's best to cut those ties to the past," she said, her voice taking on a new quality. Harder, more businesslike. "You're in a new chapter now, Vincent, and it would be best not to give information about our location to people who don't understand what we're building here." For the first time since he had met Elena, Vincent felt real fear. It wasn't just disappointment or confusion. It was a primal terror that rose from his stomach and made his mouth go dry. "Elena," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and pastoral, "I need to know more about this foundation. I need to see actual documents, meet the board members, visit the refugee communities we're supposed to serve." She studied him for a long moment, as if making an important calculation. Then she smiled, the same warm, vulnerable smile he had fallen for in their first video call. But now he could see the performance behind it, the way her eyes didn't quite match the expression. "Of course, my dear friend. Tomorrow I'll take you to meet some people. You'll see that everything is exactly as I promised. You're just tired from the travel, experiencing culture shock. It's completely normal." But Vincent knew with a certainty that chilled his blood that Elena was lying. And for the first time in his adult life, he found himself completely alone in a foreign country, without real resources. Elena had offered to hold his passport for safekeeping, saying it would be needed for his work visa processing, and with a woman he was beginning to suspect he knew absolutely nothing about. That night, after Elena finally left his apartment with a lingering touch on his shoulder, Vincent prayed more fervently than he had in years. But his prayers were no longer ones of gratitude or spiritual discernment. They were desperate pleas from a man who was beginning to understand that he had made the biggest mistake of his life, and that it might already be too late to correct it. The following days turned into a slow and suffocating nightmare. Elena appeared every morning with different excuses for the delays. The foundation's legal registration was held up in UAE bureaucracy. The board chair had an emergency in London. The refugee community center had closed temporarily due to Ramadan observances, though Vincent was fairly certain it wasn't Ramadan. Each explanation sounded more implausible than the last, but Vincent had no way of verifying any information. Elena had established a carefully controlled routine. She arrived at his apartment each morning around 9, insisting they work together on strategic planning documents that never seemed to lead anywhere concrete. She took him to expensive lunches at hotels far from the office, always paying in cash. She deflected every request to visit actual charitable operations or meet real beneficiaries. And most troublingly, she had his passport. When Vincent asked for it back, claiming he needed it for identification, she became evasive. "The visa processing requires it," she insisted. "The immigration lawyers have it. I'll get it back to you once your work permit is approved." Vincent tried to protest, but she was adamant. "Vincent, you don't understand how things work in the Emirates. The bureaucracy is complex. You need to trust me on this. I've lived here for years. If you start making demands and rocking the boat, it could derail everything we've worked toward." When he insisted he wanted to visit the Irish embassy, she showed him news articles on her phone about bureaucratic difficulties, delays in passport replacements, how complicated it would be to explain his situation. She was selectively highlighting the most alarming possibilities, making him afraid to take action. Alone in the cramped apartment, Vincent spent hours trying to understand his situation. He used the Wi-Fi to obsessively research Elena Volkov, but the information remained contradictory and scarce. Worse still, he discovered that the emergency credit card Father Declan had given him, just in case, had been declined. When he confronted Elena about this, she had a ready explanation. "Oh, that might be because of the visa processing fees I paid on your behalf. The lawyers needed payment up front, about €3,000. I used the card information you gave me for the travel arrangements. You'll reimburse me from the foundation's consultant fees once everything is finalized." "But I never gave you permission to." "Vincent," she interrupted, her patience clearly wearing thin, "I was trying to help you. These are necessary expenses. Would you prefer I hadn't processed your visa? That you be here illegally?" When he asked for concrete dates, receipts, documentation, she became evasive and irritable. The situation deteriorated rapidly. In the second week, Elena began arriving at odd hours, sometimes very early, sometimes not until late afternoon. Her explanations about meetings became more elaborate and less convincing. Her phone rang constantly with calls she would take in hushed Russian, stepping out onto the small balcony. One evening, when Vincent asked her directly about when they would actually begin the charitable work, she exploded in anger for the first time. "You have no right to question me like this," she said sharply, her accent thickening with emotion. "I've invested enormous resources in this foundation, brought you here at great expense, arranged everything, and all I get is suspicion and ingratitude." Vincent had never seen this side of her. Her face was flushed, her hands clenched, her entire demeanor transformed from the grieving widow into someone hard and calculating. "Elena, please," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I just want to understand what's happening. When can I meet the board? When do we actually start helping refugees?" She laughed, but it was a brittle sound without warmth. "The foundation, Vincent." She paused, seeming to make a decision. "The foundation is more complex than I initially explained. There are political complications, legal issues that need to be resolved before we can operate openly." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that require patience and discretion," she said coldly. "You're here now, Vincent. You left your parish, took your sabbatical. You're committed to this project whether the timeline matches your expectations or not." Vincent tried to move toward the door, suddenly desperate for space, for air, but Elena stepped into his path. "Where are you going to go, Vincent? You don't know anyone in this city. You don't speak Arabic. Your passport is in visa processing. Your credit card is maxed out. I am the only person you have here." Her words were delivered calmly now, almost gently, but they hit him like physical blows. She was right. He was completely dependent on her. That night, for the first time since arriving in Dubai, Vincent allowed himself to fully acknowledge his situation. He had abandoned his parish, taken an unauthorized leave that was rapidly burning bridges with his diocese, and followed a woman who was clearly not who she claimed to be. The Elena he had met online, the grieving, faithful, generous widow, was a carefully constructed fiction. In her place was this calculating stranger who saw him as, what? A pawn? A victim? A means to some end he couldn't yet see? In the days that followed, Vincent desperately tried to find a way out. He managed to access his email late one night by resetting his password, using Elena's absence to send a cryptic message to Father Declan. "I'm in trouble. Dubai is not what I expected. I need help to get home. My passport is being held." But when he checked again the next morning, he discovered the message had been moved to drafts, unsent. And worse, his account password had been changed again. "Did you try to access your email without telling me?" Elena confronted him that afternoon, her eyes hard. "The Foundation's IT security flagged unusual login attempts from your account. That's very concerning, Vincent. We have confidentiality protocols for a reason." "That's my personal email," he protested. "You have no right. Everything connected to the Foundation is subject to our security measures," she said firmly. "That was in the consultant agreement you signed. Don't you remember?" Vincent didn't remember signing anything of substance, but Elena produced a document with what appeared to be his signature. Had he signed it without reading carefully? In that first disorienting week? The situation worsened when Elena began bringing visitors to the small apartment. Men in expensive suits who spoke in rapid Russian and Arabic, smoked expensive cigars, and looked at Vincent with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. "Business associates," Elena explained casually. "They're helping with the Foundation's financial structuring. Don't worry about them." But Vincent overheard fragments of conversations that alarmed him. Although he didn't speak Russian, he recognized certain English words scattered through their discussions: priest, Irish, passport, value. During one of these meetings, he clearly heard Elena say something in English that made his blood run cold. Yes, Irish Catholic, educated, 42 years old. No close family, brother deceased, parents dead. Very trusting, easy to control. Useful for certain introductions. Vincent stood frozen in the bedroom doorway, trying to process what he'd heard. Elena wasn't just holding him in Dubai under false pretenses. She was discussing him like merchandise, like an asset to be leveraged. That night, while Elena was out, she had stopped pretending to maintain appropriate hours. Vincent made the most courageous decision of his life. He would try to escape. He found some UAE dirham notes that Elena had left on the kitchen counter. He put his prayer book in his jacket pocket and waited, listening intently to the sounds of the building. The apartment door had a complex electronic lock, but Elena had been careless that afternoon, and he had watched her enter the code, 2580. His hands trembled as he pressed the numbers. The lock clicked open with a soft beep that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet apartment. Vincent stepped out into the sterile hallway of the modern building. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Security cameras blinked red in the corners. He forced himself to walk normally to the elevator, praying he wouldn't encounter anyone who might question him. The elevator descended smoothly, opening onto a marble lobby that was empty except for a security guard at a distant desk, absorbed in his phone. Vincent walked purposefully toward the glass doors, trying to project the confidence of someone who belonged there. The hot Dubai night air hit him like a furnace when he stepped outside. It was approximately 2 a.m., and the streets were eerily empty, so different from the bustling daytime city. The modern towers loomed around him like glowing monuments to wealth he couldn't comprehend. Vincent had no idea where he was or where to go, but he knew that anywhere would be better than that apartment that had become his prison. The streets of Dubai at 2 a.m. were a disorienting maze of identical luxury towers and pristine sidewalks that seemed to lead nowhere. Vincent walked quickly, trying to orient himself by the distant glow of the Burj Khalifa, the impossibly tall spire he'd seen from Elena's apartment. But Dubai wasn't built for pedestrians. There were no corner shops, no late-night cafes where he might ask for directions. Just endless facades of residential towers, closed shopping complexes, and the occasional speeding taxi that ignored his desperate attempts to flag it down. After wandering for nearly an hour, exhausted and drenched in sweat, he spotted a small mosque set back from the road, its minaret illuminated in the darkness. An elderly man in traditional white robes was entering, preparing for the pre-dawn far prayer. Vincent approached hesitantly, trying to remember what little he knew about Muslim prayer customs, hoping that the universal concept of sanctuary might transcend cultural and religious boundaries. "Excuse me," he said in English, his voice hoarse from dehydration and fear. "Please, I need help. Police. Irish Embassy." The elderly man studied him suspiciously. A disheveled Western man in civilian clothes, clearly panicked in the early hours of the morning, was not a common sight even in cosmopolitan Dubai. He shook his head and gestured for Vincent to leave, muttering something in Arabic. Vincent persisted, pulling up his sleeve to show the red marks on his wrist where Elena had grabbed him during an argument days earlier, trying to explain his situation with desperate gestures and the few words he knew. Help. Passport. Stolen. Woman. Dangerous. Finally, the man seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He called to someone inside the mosque, and a younger man appeared, perhaps his son, who spoke some English. They took Vincent inside, offered him water, and discussed the situation in rapid Arabic while glancing at him with expressions of concern and confusion. The younger man picked up a phone and began dialing what Vincent hoped was the police. But before the call could connect, they heard the sound of a car pulling up aggressively outside, tires squealing on the pristine pavement. Elena had discovered his escape. Vincent immediately recognized the sound of the luxury sedan she'd been driving. His blood ran cold as he heard the car door slam and rapid footsteps approaching the mosque entrance. "She found me," he whispered, grabbing the older man's arm. "Please, you have to help me. She's holding my passport. But it was too late. Elena strode through the mosque entrance, followed by two men Vincent vaguely recognized from the mysterious meetings in the apartment. One was Middle Eastern, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. The other was European, thick-necked and cold-eyed. Their expressions were controlled, professional, which somehow made them more terrifying than open rage would have been. Elena spoke rapidly with the men from the mosque, her voice alternating between respectful and firm tones. Vincent didn't need to understand Arabic to know that she was lying, spinning some story. He caught fragments, her gestures toward him, her hand to her temple suggesting mental instability, her voice taking on a tone of patient exasperation. The elderly man looked from Elena to Vincent, clearly confused and uncomfortable with the situation. Vincent tried to protest. "She's lying. She's taken my passport, my money. She's not who she says." But one of Elena's companions stepped forward and spoke in perfect English to the mosque attendants. "I'm very sorry for this disturbance during your prayer time. This man is experiencing a mental health crisis. We're his medical escorts." He stopped taking his medications and wandered away from his care facility. The lie was smooth, plausible, delivered with just the right mixture of professional concern and apologetic embarrassment. "That's not true," Vincent protested. "I'm a priest, was a priest. From Ireland. She lured me here under false pretenses." Elena approached him, her face a masterpiece of concerned compassion. "Vincent, darling," she said in English, her voice gentle. "You're having an episode. Let's get you back where you can rest, where the doctors can help you." "I'm not crazy," Vincent shouted, But he could see the men from the mosque exchanging glances, the kind of looks that suggested they were reconsidering their involvement. A Western woman with official-looking escorts versus a panicked, disheveled foreign man. The calculus was obvious. Elena moved closer and grasped his arm, not hard enough to obviously hurt, but with enough pressure to convey a message. She leaned in close, her mouth near his ear, and whispered in a voice only he could hear. "If you don't come with me now, quietly and calmly, these men will be questioned by police who are already in my pocket. Do you want them arrested, possibly deported, because you couldn't control yourself? Is that very Christian of you, Vincent?" The threat worked. Vincent couldn't bear the thought that his escape attempt might result in consequences for people who had tried to help him. He allowed Elena to guide him toward the door under the confused but resigned glances of the mosque attendants. "I'm so sorry," Elena said to them graciously. "Thank you for your kindness. His family will be very grateful you kept him safe." The ride back was a silent nightmare. Elena drove with terrifying calm while the two men sat on either side of Vincent in the back seat. None of them spoke during the 20 minutes it took to reach the apartment building, but Vincent could feel something emanating from them. Not anger, but a cold professional assessment that was somehow worse. Back at the apartment, Elena dismissed her companions with a few words in Russian. When the door closed, leaving them alone, she turned to Vincent with an expression he would never forget. It was no longer the grieving widow or even the irritated business associate. It was something calculating and utterly cold. "You have disappointed me deeply, Vincent," she said, her accent thicker now, her English clipped. "I thought you were smarter than that. More practical." She walked slowly around him, and Vincent was suddenly reminded of a documentary he'd once seen about predators circling prey. "Now I must take measures to ensure this never happens again." Vincent tried to move toward the door, but Elena's two associates had apparently not left the building. They appeared from the hallway. They must have been waiting just outside. The struggle was brief and one-sided. Vincent was no match for the thick-necked European man's professional efficiency. When he woke up hours later, his head throbbing, he found himself in the apartment's small bedroom. The door was locked from the outside. His phone, wallet, and shoes were gone. The window was sealed. He tried it immediately, and even if it weren't, he was on the 8th floor. For the next 3 days, Vincent remained a prisoner in the bedroom. Elena brought him water and small amounts of food, but barely spoke to him. He could hear constant activity in the apartment, people coming and going, conversations in Russian and Arabic that became more urgent with each passing day. Once, he clearly heard someone mention priest and liability in English. On the morning of the 4th day, Elena entered the room with a different expression, almost sad. "Things have changed, Vincent," she said, standing in the doorway. "My associates were not happy with your escape attempt. They no longer trust that you can be properly managed." She sat on the edge of the bed, a grotesque parody of pastoral care. "We're going on a drive. To a place where we can discuss your future more privately." Vincent knew with sudden, terrible clarity what she meant. He'd become a liability, a witness who knew too much, someone who couldn't be controlled or sold or used for whatever purpose Elena had originally intended. "Please, Elena," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I won't try to escape again. I'll do whatever you want. Just let me go home. I'll tell everyone the Foundation was real, that I was the one who failed." She studied him for a long moment, and for a second Vincent thought he saw something almost human in her eyes. Regret, perhaps, or just calculation. "It's too late for that now," she said finally. "You made your choice when you tried to run. The consequences have already been set in motion." That afternoon, they left the apartment. The thick-necked man drove while Elena sat in the passenger seat. Vincent was in the back, his hands zip-tied in front of him, covered by his jacket so as not to attract attention. They headed out of the city, following the wide highway into the desert. Vincent, watching the gleaming towers of Dubai recede in the distance, felt a strange detachment. He'd spent 20 years as a priest preparing people for death, comforting them with promises of heaven, assuring them that God had a plan. Now, facing his own mortality, he found his faith fracturing like glass. They drove for over an hour, the landscape transforming from manicured developments to raw desert. Eventually, they turned onto a dirt track that led away from the main road, following it until even the highway was no longer visible, just endless sand dunes stretching to the horizon. When they finally stopped, the sun was beginning to set, tinging the desert orange and red. There were no buildings in sight, no signs of human presence except the tire tracks they just made. Just sand, rocks, and a silence so complete it felt oppressive. Elena turned off the engine. For several minutes, they sat in air-conditioned stillness, listening to nothing but the faint whisper of sand against metal. "This is where your journey ends, Vincent," Elena said, her voice strangely gentle again, almost the voice he'd first fallen for in those video calls months ago. "Where you will find the peace you were looking for." The European man opened the trunk and removed something. Vincent couldn't see what. Elena got out of the car and stood for a moment looking at the desert, her hair moving in the hot wind. Vincent understood with absolute certainty what was going to happen. There would be no trafficking, no ransom. He was simply a problem to be eliminated, a witness to be silenced, another foolish foreigner who would disappear into the vast emptiness of the Arabian desert. The tears he thought he'd cried out during his days of imprisonment came again, but this time they felt different. Not desperate, but almost cleansing. When Elena opened the back door, Vincent spoke for what he thought might be the last time. "May I pray?" She hesitated, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or a ghost of the empathy she'd so expertly faked. Then she nodded. Vincent closed his eyes, clutched his prayer book, the one physical possession they'd allowed him to keep, and began the Lord's Prayer. Not in Latin, as he'd said it thousands of times as a priest, but in English simply, the way his mother had taught him as a child. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." His voice was carried away by the desert wind, words dissolving into the vast indifference of sand and sky. 3 weeks later, a group of construction workers surveying a site for a new development found the remains of a small campsite in the desert. Some tire tracks nearly erased by the sand, fragments of fabric caught in low scrub brush, and a black leather prayer book, its pages stiff with heat but still legible. UAE authorities recorded the find, but without a body or concrete evidence of a crime, the case was filed as a missing person inquiry. They contacted the Irish embassy, which confirmed that a Father Vincent O'Brien had entered the country on September 15th but had no record of departure. In Ireland, the parish of St. Brendan's continued to pray for their former priest, waiting for news that never came. Father Declan Murphy tried repeatedly to get answers from UAE authorities, but each inquiry was met with bureaucratic indifference. Bishop Brennan quietly closed the investigation, noting in official records that Father O'Brien had left his position under unclear circumstances, and may have experienced a crisis of vocation. The prayer book was eventually sent to the Irish embassy in Abu Dhabi, where it remains to this day in a storage room, along with other belongings of Irish citizens who disappeared abroad. It sits in a manila envelope, catalog number IE 2023-0847, the only silent testimony of a man who sought divine purpose and found human evil in its purest form. If anyone were to open it, which no one has in months, they would find it opened permanently to Psalm 23, the pages creased as though someone had read those words many times. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." But in the end, there were no green pastures, no still waters, just sand and silence and the complete erasure of a life that had once meant something to a small parish in County Cork. Elena Volkov, if that was ever her real name, disappeared as thoroughly as her victim. The apartment in Dubai Marina was vacated within days. The foundation office stood empty. Every digital trace she'd created dissolved as if it had never existed. Somewhere in the world, she was already constructing a new identity, crafting a new story, identifying a new victim. Because men like Vincent O'Brien, lonely, idealistic, hungry for significance, would always exist. And predators like Elena would always find them, as inevitable as death finding life in the desert sun. The only difference was that next time, she would be more careful. Next time, she wouldn't let her prey first.